I needed this place to listen to the words people had to say. That's something they could never understand. You've done your part. You told us plenty. You've known the pain of ages. And even now you think, as any person would, that this can't be happening. Is it education? Morals? Faith? Just the imprint of a lifetime of stories? Face to face with oblivion, which is where you are, and you still think that help is coming. The world you were born into is made to save you. Isn't that right? Of course it is. Everyone knows that. Until your last breath, you know it. Without the slightest chance or reason left to them, humans are capable of hope. I'm no different. But for one thing, when my time came calling, I didn't die. My family died, my country died, but they didn't take me with them. All hell took from me was this skin, this outer peel that marked me human.
For years, MGS creator Hideo Kojima has cited the Japanese postmodern sci-fi writer Kobo Abe as a major influence. But how precisely Abe's novels have informed or prefigured Kojima's games has never really been analyzed, until now. Welcome to a special mini-series spin-off of Metal Gear Solid, dedicated to describing Kobo Abe's influence on Hideo Kojima in detail. We begin with a work of special significance to 2015's Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, Abe's 1964 work, The Face of Another. Kobo Abe, survivor of the Second World War, recipient of a medical degree turned postmodern novelist, may not be especially well known outside Japan. But his work, starting in the 1950s, represents some of the earliest Japanese science fiction. And overall, Abe, whose literary career lasted until his death in 1993, influenced not only Hideo Kojima, but many others in Kojima's generation of game designers, authors, and artists. As the author of such bizarre works as Woman in the Dunes or Kangaroo Notebook, Kobo Abe is not the kind of author/playwright that you can easily classify. But throughout his career, Abe tended to focus on lonely and repressed, specifically Japanese characters, attempting to navigate some speculative world. In his first novel, Enter Ice Age 4, we see an ambitious Abe tackling a post-apocalyptic sci-fi dystopia. In his most famous story, Woman in the Dunes, from the 1960s, an entomologist, which is a bug expert, quite literally stumbles into a different world, one comprised of a cult-like micro-society dwelling amid the sand dunes beside a Japanese seaside village. Protagonist Nikki Junpei soon finds himself accepting his new role as housemate of the titular Woman in the Dunes, a fellow prisoner, a widow of the sands. Along the way, the novel meditates on desire, the nature of the social contract, and the meaning of madness. Abe's ability is to meld together outlandish, speculative what-if scenarios with a quality of prose and a substance of ideas that, as a Hideo Kojima fanatic, feels very familiar, even nostalgic. But since my channel is known for Metal Gear Solid 5 stuff, I thought I would start with the subject of this essay, which is Abe's 1964 novel, The Face of Another. You'll remember the antagonist of Kojima's MGSV is Skullface, a man whose racial identity has been literally burned away, a man without a face who lusts for revenge both against Cypher and the world Cypher has built out of the connective tissue of the English language, the rise of IT, and Cold War geopolitics. Well, Skullface and MGS5's secret second protagonist, Punish Venom Snake, they bear more than a passing resemblance to the unnamed protagonist of A Face of Another. This scientist lost his face in the novel to a laboratory accident. And that's not all. He also loses his humanity. His face, we're told, is the bridge to the wider world, an external component of his personality. With that passageway demolished, that personality defaced, our protagonist finds himself transformed, trapped, alone with his own new dark thoughts, which we soon discover have been twisted and debased alongside his physical countenance.
My village had an oilseed field and a fine factory. Every day, my friends and I would see our parents at work in that factory. That's all I had, all the world I knew. Then one day, aircraft came droning in from some far-off sky. The factory was bombed. Some spies had told them we were making weapons. The building burned. We tried to flee outside. The crowd blocked the exit. The crowd of people. Hot. So hot. I tried to push through their legs and get ahead, but a boot in my stomach put me on the ground. The smoke of them burning filled me up. I heard my name called, but not for long. At the infirmary they carried me to, a nurse in the corridor saw me and remarked, as if it happened every day, they should let the poor thing die. Those are the only words of my mother tongue I remember. It was the language of my village. Until foreign troops invaded. Then the last identity I had left, the words I spoke, were pulled from me. My skin would never feel anything again. This face would be burned again, in torture, at foreign hands. But I still writhe in that burning factory, doused in scalding rapeseed oil.
Like Kojima's villain, Skullface, the novel's protagonist, by losing his face, loses contact with his humanity, and comes to see everything in his life in a broken, twisted, even perverted way. How he sees the world, even how he hears music, changes with his face. This is much like how Skullface in the game feels losing not just his face, but also his language.
To unite America and the entire world. The Major thought this was his friend's ruin. But I think he never understood what she wanted. Before he ever walked or cried, even before he was born, his mother tongue was English. He doesn't know the pain of losing his own language. Not yet. He cannot understand her will. I do. I was born in a small village. I was still a child when we were raided by soldiers. Foreign soldiers. Torn from my elders, I was made to speak their language. With each new post, my masters changed, along with the words they made me speak. Words are peculiar. With each change, I changed too. My thoughts, personality, how I saw right and wrong. War changed me. And not only my visage. Words can kill.
Now, ultimately, the stakes in Face of Another are much lower than a game like Metal Gear Solid. In The Face of Another, our protagonist hatches a lurid and deranged plan to prove his wife's lack of love for the new him. And he does this by trying to seduce her wearing another man's face. In The Phantom Pain, Skullface hatches a twisted plan designed to rearrange the delicate global balance of power, to become one oriented around smaller powers and groups whose Skullface's revolutionary nuclear proliferation scheme will transform into virtually the same as the Cold War superpowers overnight by giving them access to nuclear weapons. But beyond superficial differences, The Phantom Pain and The Face of Another share a lot in common. Not only in terms of sharing faceless, dispossessed wretches at their centers, and keep in mind that Venom Snake is also a sort of faceless wretch, who, in Phantom Pain, it's heavily implied, has actually had his face removed and changed with big bosses. The similarities also evident when it comes to themes, like perception becoming, through loneliness, a kind of ready-made reality, indistinguishable from the real thing. At one point, for example, the stares of strangers in the novel, quote, pestered me like flies. Then shortly after, subtly, Abe drops the sense of metaphor and just refers to an escape from those stares as chasing the flies away. He cannot feel himself included, so our protagonist calls himself a heretic because, quote, I am against the spirit of today. What he wants more than anything is to rejoin the human race by regaining a face, real or not, and thereby, real or not, reconnect with the world of fellow human beings. We see this with Skullface in a weird, twisted way. As the protagonist of the novel says, I needed something to clear the obstruction of the scars and restore the roadway to other people. Yes, like MGS5 and its themes, like the internet, The Face of Another is about connections. But what's wrong with the protagonist goes beyond the merely physical, goes beyond an inability to connect. The true damage is something psychological, something also social. A part of him wants the whole world to share in his disease once he loses his face. He becomes repellent, even hideous to the outside world, not only estranged, but more than hostile, even violent. All he has to mark his own humanity anymore is his skull, which he compares to the No masks of Japanese antiquity. Our protagonist obsesses about the multiplicity of meanings you can derive from faces and their role in society. Just as Skullface in MGS finds his entire personality, his sense of right and wrong, changing with each new language he is forced to speak, new face, basically, he's forced to adopt. The Face of Another's protagonist also undergoes dramatic changes to his sense of self on the basis of something external. It's the different masks, different faces that he wears.
You too have known loss, and that loss torments you still. You hope hatred might someday replace the pain, but it never goes away. It makes a man hideous, inside and out. Wouldn't you agree? We both are demons. Our humanity won't return. You, me, we've no place to run, nowhere to hide. And that is why I'll show you my demon. Follow me, big boss!
Perception in these stories has a tendency to blur indistinguishably and deceptively with reality. Skullface tricks the Patriots into making his plans semi-reality as a defense mechanism, as he essentially hijacks the logic of an arms race and sets the system up to destroy itself with proliferation and Metal Gears. Though we're told it's a paper tiger, his Metal Gear Sahelanthropus transforms the world just as a mere idea. And then, of course, there's the protagonist, Venom Snake, who becomes, like the protagonist in The Face of Another, a different person altogether just by the changing of his face. Which, again, may or may not happen actually literally with Big Boss and the Phantom Pain. Like Abe's nameless protagonist, we only know Venom Snake indirectly, by various pseudonyms or his job description, like Medic. And also, like in Abe's novel, by the end, the mask takes over our personality in MGS5 entirely, echoing the boss's words about masks in MGS3. Make no mistake, our protagonist in the novel sometimes wants to spread his own sickness like a virus. He thinks the whole world should become faceless, just so that he won't be alone. At one point, he muses faceless battalions would be ideal groups of soldiers. Unflinchingly rushing on to destruction for the sake of destruction, they would make splendid fighting units, end quote. At multiple points, he wishes for some mass outbreak of sensory dehabilitation for the rest of humanity, like blindness. In another section, he fantasizes that exposure to the sight of his true face, all scarred and obliterated beneath the Ishmael and MGS5 style bandages that he wears throughout most of the novel, is deadly. Quote, as I imagined it, the face I displayed would be quite unlike any human face. The three on the streetcar would be transformed into stone or lumps of lead or even insects, and the other passengers who had witnessed the scene would be transformed with them, end quote. The protagonist has become hideous on the inside as well as out, you see. He begins to simmer with resentment at everyone and everything in his life. And this hostility I think we really feel from Skullface as well. And yet, in The Face of Another, our protagonist's loss of a face grants him this weird perspective that at times brings an awful clarity. Sometimes he can almost sound wise. For example, on page 203, quote, if men from the very beginning had not had faces, the problem of racial differences would never have arisen. End quote. As we read, much as when we play and replay missions in The Phantom Pain involving Skullface, it's hard not to feel a little swayed or influenced by the protagonist's uniquely tortured perspective. Skullface wants to strip the world of any lingua franca, common tongue. The novel's protagonist wants to deface the world. His obsessions with faces becomes pathological. What also really reminds me of Skullface about the protagonist is that he makes a lot of rather baroque metaphors.
I was born a tiny mote in a mighty tempest, and until those winds abate, all I can choose is how to act when they blow me this way or that. Tell me, code talker, what happens to a man infected with a pair of your parasites? Can they be removed?
What we're seeing in both of these stories is how resentment and pain and hatred can pervert and twist and corrupt things like a disease. Skullface is not right in the head, even if sometimes he has this weird clarity, and the same is true of our protagonist in the novel. Without spoiling the ending entirely, The Face of Another is one of the best novels, I'd say, really, of the 20th century. Its unique structure as a series of notebooks left for us by the protagonist, notebooks filled with footnotes written after the events that they portray, blurs both our sense of time as well as identity and perspective. By the end, Abe's haunting maze of a novel is about the true face of love, which is something deeper than the surface, and the true faces of self-hatred and torture as well. It's a heavy read, even if it's not very long, but it's a must-read if you want to better understand Skullface or MGS5 and its themes of identity, of race, faces, and pain. Reading The Face of Another 61 years later, how can I not think about the fractalized self in the modern information age? The self that must traffic in the guises of memes and internet profiles and things like that to stay camouflaged, to avoid standing out, to wear the mask of normalcy. As one character puts it in the novel, the human animal can validate his ego only through the eyes of others, end quote. When you consider the internet and the rise of the information age is a very big theme in Metal Gear Solid 5, the connections to the novel there are fascinating to me. Much like the character Skullface, Kobo Abe's protagonist is twisted to the point of becoming something of a psychosexual deviant, even violent personality. Both portray forms of madness at their most tragic. In MGS5, Skullface himself, between Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain, you'll remember, puts on a Lone Ranger-style black mask. In his case, this mask seems to represent the mysteries of Skullface's sinister and highly secretive plan, something he gains considerable power by hiding behind, something he fashions his own, new identity, new language, new face out of. In the face of another, our protagonist fashions the self he wants to be, even as the mask he creates begins to take on a life of its own. And he develops his own twisted, secret plan that ultimately goes horribly awry. Quote, "Both the desire to restore the roadway between us and vengeful craving to destroy you fiercely contended within me. At length, I could not distinguish between them." End quote. Weirdly, while both playing MGS5 and reading The Face of Another, I found myself pondering the same unexpected thing. The internet. As I said, the internet both as an ideal hatched in the late 20th century and the reality of it as we live with it in the 21st century. Think about how the promise of the internet age was essentially the freedom to decide your own identity in online spaces. The persona our protagonist adopts when he wears his mask, it reminds me a bit of something like internet trolls or the other selves that we prefer to be, that we create for ourselves using digital technology. Consider the internet, which is obviously a much more deliberate subject in MGS5, next to the following passage. Quote, "If covering our bodies with clothes represents a cultural step forward, there is no guarantee that in the future, masks will not be taken equally for granted. I wonder if a mask, being universal, enhances our relations with others more than the naked face." End quote, page 14. Skullface calls it our modern world's technological veil. But the idea is the same at any rate. Today, masks and appearances mediated by digital technology have largely circumvented, or all out replaced, our notions of reality. We'll end by looking at a couple of quotes here. Think about how angry Skullface is, right? And how vengeful. Consider these lines from the novel. "People like me who lack something are liable to become spiteful critics." Page 73. Or this one on page 120. "Suddenly, I thought how good it would be if the fog outside were poison gas. How nice if war erupted. A volcano erupted. All the world were asphyxiated. The realities of life smashed to pieces." End quote. Remember that at bottom, on some level, why Skullface wanted to spread the disease of nuclear proliferation and deprive the world of English as its lingua franca was so Skullface would no longer be alone. What he wants is ultimately some form of communication. I think MGS5 and this novel share communication as their major theme. I think of MGS5's many audio tapes instead of cutscenes when I read the lines, quote, "Isn't it common to find a single record that communicates with the heart far more profoundly than 100 years of scanning faces?" Page 31. We have to imagine these characters in the MGS5 tapes without being able to see their faces. It's as though we see firsthand Zero's ideal that in the information age, one soul is able to communicate with another without the need for the naked face at all. But what if the soul is itself ugly? Made ugly by what's happened to the face. Made hideous inside and out. In the end, both Skullface and our protagonist in the novel underestimate reality. Yet both also end their respective stories with the line between face and substance, appearance and reality, inside and out, personality and persona, totally blurred. And this, of course, also applies to Venom Snake, who by the end, even though he realizes he's not the original Big Boss, winds up playing the character of Big Boss on the world stage by wearing his mask, his face. These characters are all as haunting as they are memorable. Like MGS5, Abe's Face of Another will tingle your spine and leave you thinking about it for long after it's over. I'll leave with these two quotes we can compare. One from Skullface, one from the protagonist. Skullfaces, I may dwell in the dark, but I refuse to be judged by your standards, traitor. The protagonist, I shall hate people. I shall never admit the necessity of justifying myself to anyone. Page 237. Until next time, boss.
That's all I have to feel. That pain. All I have to remind me I exist here. Those spies reported well. We made weapons, all right. As cartloads of rifles came in from the battlefields, we fixed them up and sent them back out. So our country could win. Or rather, so that little world we knew could continue. I came to realize I mustn't die. I'm their last hope. All those who perished and left me here. I have to accomplish something. If I don't, their will be swept out of this world. So, do you see me now? Tell me, what do you see? You have eyes. What do your eyes see? Yes, that's right. You see a skull face. You see me. This skull is who I am. My mark, my proof of humanity. I have no country, no language, I have no face, but I haven't lost my skull. So I told myself, the pain and effort that keep me alive will never know relief, never bear fruit, never be repaid. I know that, but I told myself to focus on some hope, a non-existent hope, to guide me through this burning world. A hope. Call it a dream. A melancholic delusion. As the pressures within me stretch me to bursting, and I force myself not to cry out, though the words I thought were carved into me are gone, and all I knew is dead. I know how you feel. I've felt that. So show me that I'm not the only one. That you too can return to this world for revenge. Do you see me? Don't die. Don't die!